I booked an entire restaurant for my birthday with my family. When I arrived, there was a place card with my name on it. It read, "The useless old lady who's just a burden." I stayed silent and had dinner alone. They had no idea that just one day later, they'd be banging on my door, their eyes red from crying, because I had finally made a decision that would change everything. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about that card. It's about how I spent 43 years being invisible in my own family. The morning of my 68th birthday, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. I hadn't felt this excited in years. For weeks, I'd been planning this dinner at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown. It wasn't cheap. The private dining room cost me $800.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Plus the prix-fixe menu for 8 people. But money had never been an issue when it came to my daughter Carol. I chose my nicest dress, the navy blue one with tiny pearl buttons that my late husband Robert always said made my eyes sparkle. Standing in front of my bedroom mirror in my small apartment, I practiced my smile. Tonight would be different. Tonight, Carol would finally see me as more than just someone who paid her bills. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered to my reflection, though the words felt hollow in the empty apartment. I'd been supporting Carol financially since she was 18. College tuition at that expensive private school she insisted on, her wedding that cost more than most people's houses, the down payment on her dream home in Brookfield Heights. Every month for the past 27 years, I'd transferred money from my modest savings account to hers, watching my own nest egg shrink while her lifestyle grew more lavish. But mothers do that, don't they? We sacrifice. We give. We make sure our children have better lives than we did. The taxi dropped me off at Romano's at exactly 6:30. I wanted to be there early to make sure everything was perfect. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to the private dining room I'd reserved. The tables were set beautifully with white linens and fresh flowers. 8 place settings, each with its own elegant name card. That's when I saw it. My name card, positioned at the far end of the table, didn't simply say Margaret or Mom or even Mrs. Patterson. In Carol's careful handwriting, it read, "The useless old lady who's just a burden." I stared at those words until they blurred together. My hands started shaking as I picked up the card, reading it again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there was no mistaking my daughter's penmanship or her message. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" the hostess asked, appearing beside me with a concerned expression. I forced a smile and slipped the card into my purse. "Everything's fine, dear. Just perfect." The first guests arrived 20 minutes later. David, my son-in-law, swept in wearing an expensive suit, and that confident smile he reserved for his business associates. Behind him came the Hendersons, the Williamses, and the Kellys, all couples from David's law firm. Important people, he'd always reminded me. The kind of people Carol wanted to impress. Carol herself appeared last, radiant in a designer dress I'd helped pay for, her blonde hair perfectly styled at the salon I'd treated her to last week. She air-kissed my cheek without really looking at me. "Margaret, you look nice," she said in that tone she used when she was trying to sound caring in front of others. Then, louder, to her guests, "Please, everyone, make yourselves comfortable. This is my mother. Not, this is my wonderful mother, or this is the woman who raised me. Just, this is my mother," delivered with the same enthusiasm she might have used to introduce the cleaning lady. The dinner began, and I found myself exactly where the name card had placed me, at the very end of the table, separated from the real conversation by 7 seats of chattering guests. They discussed vacation homes in the Hamptons, private school options for children who didn't exist yet, and wine collections that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Margaret," David called down to me during the appetizer course, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. "How are you finding retirement? Keeping busy?" Before I could answer, Carol jumped in. "Oh, you know how it is. Mom has plenty of time on her hands now, don't you?" Mom? Plenty of time. As if the 40 years I'd spent working as a secretary to put her through school, the evenings I'd spent helping with her homework, the weekends I'd sacrificed to attend her soccer games and school plays were just empty hours I needed to fill. "I stay busy," I managed to say, but my voice was drowned out by Mrs. Henderson launching into a story about her recent trip to Paris. As the evening progressed, I noticed something that made my chest tighten with each passing minute. I wasn't participating in dinner. I was serving it. When someone needed their water glass refilled, Carol would catch my eye and nod toward the pitcher. When breadcrumbs scattered across the table, she'd hand me a napkin with expectant eyes. When Mr. Kelly spilled wine on his shirt, Carol actually snapped her fingers at me. "Margaret, could you grab some club soda from the bar? And maybe ask them for some salt?" I stood on trembling legs and did exactly what she asked, because that's what I'd been doing for 43 years. I served, I cleaned, I fixed, I provided, and in return, I was tolerated. The birthday cake came out, a small single-layer affair that looked like an afterthought from the restaurant's regular dessert menu. No one sang. No one made a speech. Mr. Williams raised his glass briefly and said, "To Margaret for hosting this lovely evening," as if I were the hired help receiving a tip. I sat there, surrounded by 8 people, eating birthday cake in complete silence while conversations flowed around me about everything except me. The loneliness was suffocating. I'd felt less alone sitting by myself in my apartment. When the evening finally ended, Carol pecked my cheek again. "Thanks for dinner, Margaret. It was exactly what David's colleagues needed to see. Not, 'Thank you for a wonderful birthday celebration,' or 'I'm so glad we could celebrate your special day.' I was simply a prop in David's professional networking event." I took a taxi home in silence, that name card burning like acid in my purse. Sitting in my small living room afterward, I pulled it out and read it one more time. The useless old lady who's just a burden. 43 years of sacrifice. 43 years of putting Carol first. 43 years of being the mother who never said no, never asked for anything in return, never demanded respect or recognition, and this was how she truly saw me. I looked around my modest apartment, the furniture I'd kept for decades because I'd given Carol money for her redecorating instead of buying new things for myself. The empty walls where family photos should have been, because Carol said they made her uncomfortable when she visited. The silence that filled every corner because I'd isolated myself from friendships to be available whenever my daughter needed me. For the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never allowed myself to feel about Carol: anger. Pure, clean, clarifying anger. As I got ready for bed that night, I made a decision. Tomorrow, things were going to change. I didn't know how yet, but I knew that the woman who had written that name card was about to discover exactly how useless this old lady really was, because if I was such a burden, maybe it was time for me to stop carrying everyone else's weight. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from dinner, every word, every dismissive glance. But more than that, I found myself remembering things I'd buried deep in my mind for years. Memories of how I'd gotten to this point, how I'd allowed myself to become invisible in my own daughter's life. The morning sun was streaming through my thin curtains when I finally got up and made coffee. My hands were steadier now, my mind clearer. As I sat at my small kitchen table, I did something I hadn't done in years. I really looked at my life. This apartment, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, generic beige walls that the landlord had painted 5 years ago. I'd been living here for 8 years, ever since I'd sold my beautiful house in Maplewood. The house where Robert and I had raised Carol, where we'd celebrated her first steps, her high school graduation, where we'd planned her future. I'd sold it to pay for Carol's wedding. "It's just a house, Mom," she'd said when I'd hesitated about the sale. "And my wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. David's family expects something elegant, and I can't disappoint them." I'd signed the papers the next week. The realtor had been sympathetic when I'd explained I was downsizing. She'd even helped me find this apartment, calling it cozy and perfect for someone in your situation. Your situation. A 60-year-old widow whose daughter needed $43,000 for flower arrangements and a string quartet. That wedding. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the day I'd thought would be the happiest of my life. Carol had looked beautiful, absolutely radiant in her designer gown. The ceremony was everything she'd dreamed of: elaborate, expensive, perfect. But when the photographer had gathered the family for pictures, Carol had positioned me at the very edge of every shot. "Just stand there, Mom. Try not to look so, you know." So what? I'd wondered. Old, plain, Embarrassing? I'd never asked for clarification. I opened my laptop, a gift Carol had given me 3 Christmases ago, probably the last gift she'd given me that wasn't purely obligatory, and logged into my banking app. The numbers on the screen told a story that made my stomach clench. 27 years of monthly transfers to Carol, $500 when she was in college, supposedly for textbooks and meals, $1,000 a month after she graduated, to help her get established. $1,500 monthly once she married David. Because starting a household is so expensive, Mom, and David's just building his practice. In the past year alone, I'd transferred $18,000 to my daughter. $18,000 from my Social Security and the modest savings Robert had left me. Meanwhile, my own checking account rarely held more than $800 at any given time. I pulled out a calculator and started adding. College tuition, $68,000. Wedding, $43,000. Down payment on their house, $35,000. The monthly transfers over 27 years. The total made me physically ill, $212,000. Over the course of Carol's adult life, I had given her more than $200,000. My entire inheritance from Robert, my retirement savings, the money from selling our family home, all of it had gone to Carol, while I lived in this cramped apartment, shopping at discount stores and clipping coupons to make ends meet. But the money was just part of it. What about the time? The endless hours I'd spent babysitting when Carol wanted to go out with friends, even though she didn't have children. The weekends I'd spent helping her redecorate her house, painting walls and moving furniture while she supervised from her couch. The evenings I'd cooked dinner for her and David when she claimed she was too stressed to cook for herself. "Mom's such a help," she'd tell her friends. "She doesn't mind doing these little things for us." Didn't mind, as if I didn't have my own life, my own interests, my own needs. I thought about Martha, my old friend from work. We'd been close once, having lunch together every Friday, going to movies on weekends. But gradually, as Carol's demands increased, I'd had to cancel more and more plans. "Maybe next week, Martha. Carol needs help with something." Eventually, Martha stopped calling. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that being a good mother meant being available for your child. But Carol was 45 years old. When exactly was she going to stop needing so much help? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Carol's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "How are you feeling today? You seemed a little tired last night." Tired. Not hurt, not humiliated, not devastated. Tired. "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Good. Listen, I wanted to thank you again for last night. It was exactly what David needed. The Hendersons were so impressed with the restaurant choice, and Mrs. Kelly couldn't stop talking about how lovely everything was." I waited for her to mention my birthday, to acknowledge that the dinner had supposedly been for me, but she didn't. "Actually," she continued, "that's why I'm calling. David has another work function next month, a cocktail party for the partners and their wives. We're hosting it at our house, and I was wondering if you could help out. You know, serve drinks, handle the coats, that sort of thing. We can't afford to hire actual help right now." Can't afford help. This from a woman whose closet was full of designer clothes, whose driveway held 2 luxury cars, whose house was decorated with furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries. "I was also thinking," she went on, "maybe you could contribute something toward the catering? Nothing too expensive, just maybe $2,000 or $3,000. It's important for David's career, and you know how much his success means to our future." $2,000 or $3,000, said so casually, as if she were asking me to pick up a loaf of bread from the store. "Carol," I said slowly, "do you know how much money I've given you over the years?" There was a pause. "Mom, I don't think that's really relevant. Family helps family. That's what you always taught me. Family helps family. But when had family ever helped me?" "I need to think about it," I said. "Think about what?" "Mom, this is important. David's up for senior partner next year, and these connections could make all the difference." I said I need to think about it. Another pause, longer this time. "Is everything okay? You're acting strange." "Strange? because I wasn't immediately agreeing to hand over my grocery money for her party. "I'll call you later, Carol." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from hurt. It was from a growing realization that was both terrifying and liberating. I had created this monster. For 43 years, I had taught Carol that my role in life was to give and her role was to take. I had never said no, never set boundaries, never demanded respect. I had raised her to see me exactly as she did, as a resource to be used, not a person to be loved. The woman who had written that name card wasn't a stranger. She was the daughter I had trained to see me as worthless. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Martha. "Margaret?" Her voice was surprised but warm. "It's been so long. How are you?" As I heard the genuine affection in her voice, I realized how starved I'd been for real human connection. When was the last time someone had asked how I was and actually waited for an answer? I'm ready to change some things in my life," I said. "Would you like to have coffee tomorrow? I have a feeling I'm going to need a friend." The next morning, I would take the first step toward reclaiming my life. But tonight, I sat in my small apartment and made a list of every dollar I'd given Carol, every favor I'd done, every time I'd put her needs before my own. By the time I finished, I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. I hadn't been a mother to Carol. I'd been an enabler. And if I truly loved her, it was time to stop. Meeting Martha for coffee felt like stepping back into a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. We sat in the little cafe near the library where we used to have lunch during our working days, and for the first time in years, someone listened to me, really listened. $200,000? Martha repeated, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Margaret, that's more than most people make in 5 years. I never added it up before," I admitted. "I just kept giving whenever she asked. It felt like being a good mother." Martha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, being a good mother doesn't mean bankrupting yourself for an ungrateful child." I told her about the name card, about being treated like hired help at my own birthday dinner. Martha's expression grew darker with each detail. "That's not love, Margaret. That's exploitation." Hearing someone else say it out loud made something click into place in my mind. For 3 days after our coffee date, I found myself paying attention to things I'd been blind to for years. How Carol only called when she needed something. How she never asked about my health, my feelings, my life. How every conversation centered around her needs, her problems, her wants. On Thursday afternoon, I discovered something that shattered what remained of my illusions about my daughter. I'd gone to Carol's house to drop off a check for her emergency dental work, another crisis that required immediate financial intervention. I used my key, the one she'd insisted I keep for emergencies only, planning to leave the check on her kitchen counter. But as I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the living room. Carol's voice, and David's. They were having what sounded like an argument, and Carol's tone was angrier than I'd ever heard it. "I don't care what your mother thinks about Margaret," Carol was saying. "We need her money, David. Without her monthly contributions, we can't maintain this lifestyle." I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. "But she's getting suspicious," David replied. "Last week she actually questioned how much she's given you over the years. What if she starts saying no?" Carol's laugh was cold and calculating. "She won't. She's too pathetic and desperate for my approval. You should have seen her at that dinner, sitting there like a kicked dog, grateful just to be included. It would almost be sad if it wasn't so useful." My legs felt weak. I gripped the wall to steady myself. "The woman has given us everything," David continued. "Her house, her savings, her monthly social security. She's living in that sad little apartment while we're sitting in a 6-bedroom house she paid for. Don't you feel even a little guilty?" "Guilty?" Carol's voice rose. "Why should I feel guilty? She chose to have a child. That comes with financial responsibilities. Besides, it's not like she has anything else to spend money on. No social life, no hobbies, no friends. At least this way, her money serves a purpose." I pressed my back against the wall, feeling like the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Sometimes I think we should just put her in one of those budget nursing homes," Carol continued. "The state would cover most of the costs, and we wouldn't have to pretend to care anymore. God knows it's exhausting having to act grateful every time she hands over money. Carol, that's harsh, even for you. Is it? David, she's 68 years old. How much longer is she really going to live? 5 years? 10? We just need to keep her happy enough to keep the money flowing until we don't need to anymore. Until I died. She was talking about managing me like a financial asset until I had the courtesy to die and leave her whatever was left. Plus, Carol added, her voice taking on that calculating tone I was beginning to recognize, she changed her will last year to leave everything to me. Her life insurance, her small savings account, even that pathetic jewelry collection. When she's gone, we'll finally be free of this burden. The same word from the name card. The best part is she actually thinks I love her? Carol laughed. She's so desperate for affection that she mistakes tolerance for love. It's almost too easy. I heard footsteps approaching the hallway and quickly slipped back outside, closing the door as quietly as possible. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't start the engine. 27 years. 27 years of sacrifice, of putting her needs first, of believing that unconditional love meant unconditional giving. And she saw me as nothing more than a burden to be managed until I died. The woman I'd raised, the child I'd sung to sleep, the daughter I'd held when she cried over broken hearts. She felt nothing for me, worse than nothing. She felt contempt. That evening, I called Carol and canceled the check I'd promised for her dental work. What do you mean, canceled? She demanded. Mom, I told you, this is an emergency. I'm in pain. Then use your dental insurance, I said calmly. Our insurance doesn't cover this procedure. I explained that. Mom, are you feeling okay? You've been acting really strange lately. Strange? Suspicious? Acting weird? All the ways she described me when I wasn't immediately compliant. I'm feeling fine, Carol. I'm just reconsidering some of my financial priorities. There was a long pause. Your financial priorities? Mom, family comes first. You know that. Yes, I said. Family does come first. That's exactly what I'm learning. What's that supposed to mean? It means I need to think about my own future for once. I'm getting older, and I need to be more careful with my money. Your money? Carol's voice had a sharp edge now. Mom, you don't have expensive tastes. You live in that tiny apartment, you never go anywhere or do anything. What could you possibly need money for? There it was. The assumption that because I lived simply, I didn't deserve anything, that my money was really her money, just temporarily inconvenienced by being in my bank account. Maybe I'd like to go somewhere and do something, I said quietly. Like what? Mom, be realistic. You're 68 years old. It's not like you're going to start traveling the world or taking up expensive hobbies. 68 years old. As if my age meant I should just sit quietly in my apartment until I died, existing only to fund her lifestyle. I have to go, Carol. Wait, Mom, we need to talk about this. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe you should see a doctor. Sometimes people your age start making poor decisions because of, mental changes. Mental changes. She was already laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent if I stopped being useful. Goodbye, Carol. I hung up and immediately called my bank. Within an hour, I'd stopped all automatic transfers to Carol's account. For the first time in 27 years, not a single dollar would flow from my account to hers. Then I called my lawyer and made an appointment to change my will. That night, I sat in my small apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: freedom, the weight of constantly worrying about Carol's needs, constantly sacrificing my own comfort for hers, constantly walking on eggshells to maintain her approval. All of it was lifting. My phone rang 6 times. Carol's number appeared each time. I didn't answer. She wanted to manage me like a financial asset until I died. She thought I was too pathetic and desperate to stand up for myself. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The real Margaret Patterson was about to emerge from 43 years of hiding, and she was done being anyone's burden. The lawyer's office felt like stepping into another world. Mr. Harrison was a kind man in his 50s who listened patiently as I explained my situation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with sympathetic eyes. Mrs. Patterson, you're not the first person to sit in that chair and tell me this story. Adult children who see their parents as ATM machines are more common than you'd think. I feel so foolish, I admitted. How did I let it go on for so long? Because you loved your daughter and wanted to help her. That's not foolish. It's human. But love shouldn't be a one-way transaction. We spent 2 hours restructuring my entire financial life. Mr. Harrison helped me change my will, leaving my estate to several charities instead of Carol. We set up a separate savings account that Carol couldn't access, even in an emergency. Most importantly, we discussed what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I keep thinking about my friend Martha, I told him. She mentioned a travel group she belongs to, people our age who take trips together. I always wanted to see Italy, but Robert wasn't much for traveling. And after he died, Carol always said it was too expensive and dangerous for someone my age. How old are you, Mrs. Patterson? 68. My mother is 74 and just got back from hiking in Peru. Age is just a number if you're healthy and determined. That afternoon, I did something that felt revolutionary. I went shopping for myself, not for Carol, not for anyone else, just for me. I bought new clothes, nothing expensive, but things that made me feel pretty. I got my hair styled at a real salon instead of the discount place I'd been using. I even bought myself a small piece of jewelry, silver earrings that caught the light when I moved. The woman who looked back at me from the fitting room mirror was someone I barely recognized. She stood straighter, smiled more easily, looked alive. That evening, Martha called to check on me. "You sound different," she said. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different. Martha, tell me about that travel group you mentioned." "Oh, you'd love them. We're just a bunch of people who decided retirement shouldn't mean sitting around waiting to die. There's Helen, who taught art for 40 years. James, who was a photographer. Rosa, who ran a flower shop. We've been to Spain, Ireland, Greece. We're planning a trip to Italy next spring." Italy. My heart jumped at the word. Do you think they'd be interested in meeting me? "Margaret, they'd love you. We're having coffee this Saturday to plan our next trip. Why don't you join us?" For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to that didn't involve Carol's needs or problems. But first, I had to face the inevitable confrontation. Carol appeared at my door Sunday morning, her face flushed with anger. She pushed past me into my apartment without being invited. "What the hell is going on, Mom? I went to the bank yesterday and they told me my account access has been terminated. The automatic transfers have stopped. Are you out of your mind?" I closed the door and turned to face her. She was practically vibrating with rage, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. This wasn't my little girl having a tantrum. This was a 45-year-old woman furious that her free money had been cut off. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said calmly. "This is about that stupid dental procedure, isn't it? Fine, I'll figure out another way to pay for it. But you can't just cut off my allowance without warning. Do you have any idea how this affects our budget?" Allowance. At 45 years old, my daughter thought she deserved an allowance from me. "Carol, sit down. We need to talk." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to fix this mess you've created. I overheard your conversation with David last Thursday." The color drained from her face. "What conversation?" "The one where you called me pathetic and desperate, where you discussed putting me in a budget nursing home, where you laughed about how easy it is to manipulate me." Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish. For a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who'd been caught stealing cookies. But then her expression hardened. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation." "I was dropping off money for your fake dental emergency." "It's not fake. I really need that procedure." "No, Carol. What you need is to learn how to support yourself. You're a grown woman married to a successful lawyer, and you've been living off your 68-year-old mother's Social Security. That's not how this works, Mom. Family takes care of family. You raised me to believe that family comes first. I did raise you to believe that. But I never taught you that it only goes one way." Carol stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? When did you last invite me to dinner at your house? Not to serve food, but to be your guest? When have you ever given me anything that wasn't obligatory or that cost you something you wanted? That's not... Mom, you're my mother. It's your job to take care of me." "Until when, Carol? Until you're 50? 60? Until I die? The question hung in the air between us. Carol's face was getting redder. You're being ridiculous. Parents are supposed to help their children. That's what love means. No, Carol, that's what exploitation means. Love means caring about someone's well-being, not just their usefulness to you. I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything I've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? Carol sputtered, searching for an answer. I visit you. I include you in things. I invite you to dinners. You invite me to serve at dinners. You visit when you need money. You include me when you need free labor. That's not true. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When did you last remember my birthday without being reminded? When have you ever done anything kind for me that didn't somehow benefit you? Carol stood there, her mouth opening and closing, unable to come up with a single example. You're sick, she finally said. Something's wrong with your mind. David was right. We should have you evaluated by a doctor. There it was, the threat I'd been expecting. Feel free to try, I said calmly, but you should know that I've already spoken to a lawyer. My mental competency has been professionally evaluated and documented. Any attempt to have me declared incompetent will fail, and it will expose your financial abuse of an elderly person. Financial abuse? I never abused you. You manipulated an elderly woman into giving you over $200,000 while providing nothing in return. In legal terms, that's called financial elder abuse. Carol's face went white. You can't prove that. I have bank records going back 27 years. I have witnesses who can testify about your treatment of me. And I have a recording of you and David discussing how to manage me like a financial asset until I die. I was bluffing about the recording, but Carol's expression told me she believed it. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to leave. I want you to learn how to live like an adult without your mother's money. And I want you to understand that if you truly loved me, you would want me to be happy, not just useful. Mom, please. We need that money. We've made commitments based on it. Then you shouldn't have made commitments with money that wasn't yours. Carol stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The desperation was replaced by cold calculation. Fine, she said. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you're old and sick and need help. You've made your choice. Yes, I said quietly. I have. After she left, I sat in my apartment and felt the strangest sensation. It took me a moment to identify it. Relief. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to worry about Carol's next crisis, her next demand, her next disappointment in me. I was free. That evening, I called Martha and told her about the travel group meeting. I'd love to come, I said. It's time I started living for myself. And for the first time in 43 years, I meant it. The first week after my confrontation with Carol was surprisingly peaceful. No phone calls demanding money. No text messages about emergencies that required my immediate financial intervention. No guilt-laden voicemails about how I was destroying her life. Just blessed, wonderful silence. I spent those days rediscovering myself. I read books I'd been wanting to read for years but never had time for because I was always running to Carol's rescue. I took long walks in the park near my apartment, something I'd stopped doing because Carol said it was dangerous for someone my age. I even started learning Italian using an app on my phone, dreaming of the trip to Tuscany that Martha's travel group was planning. But Carol's silence was temporary. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after our confrontation, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing there, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Margaret, we need to talk, he said, pushing past me just as Carol had done the week before. Hello, David. Please come in, I said dryly, closing the door behind him. He began pacing my small living room like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what you've done? Carol is having a breakdown. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. She's been crying constantly. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and was surprised to find that I meant it. Despite everything, seeing my daughter suffer still caused me pain. Sorry? David's voice rose. Margaret, you've destroyed our lives. Do you understand that? We have mortgages, car payments, credit card debt. We've been living on a budget that included your monthly contributions. Then you should have asked me before making those commitments, instead of simply assuming I would fund your lifestyle forever. David stopped pacing and stared at me. This isn't you talking. Someone's gotten to you, poisoned your mind against us. Is it that friend of yours, Martha? Has she been filling your head with ideas? I almost laughed. Even now, he couldn't conceive that I might have thoughts and feelings of my own. It had to be someone else influencing me. David, I overheard you and Carol discussing how to manage me until I die. I heard her call me pathetic and desperate. No one poisoned my mind. You both showed me exactly what you think of me. His face flushed red. You took that conversation out of context. Carol was just frustrated. She loves you. Does she? When was the last time she showed me love that didn't cost me money? David opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. Look, he said, his tone shifting to the persuasive voice he probably used in court. Maybe we haven't been as appreciative as we should have been. Maybe we've taken your generosity for granted. But cutting us off completely? That's cruel, Margaret. We're family. Family works both ways, David. We can change. Carol can change. Just, please, give us another chance. Resume the monthly transfers and we'll make more effort to include you, to show our appreciation. Include me how? As hired help at your dinner parties? As free babysitting when you have children? As someone to clean up your messes? That's not fair, isn't it? David, in the 7 years you've been married to my daughter, have you ever once invited me to your home as a guest? Have you ever taken me out to dinner to celebrate something in my life? Have you ever asked about my interests, my dreams, my feelings about anything? Again, silence. I didn't think so. David sat down heavily in my armchair, Robert's old chair. Margaret, please. I'm begging you. We're going to lose the house. Then maybe you should have bought a house you could afford. We can't start over at our age. Carol is 45. I'm 48. We have no savings because we counted on my money. Yes, we counted on your help because that's what family does. No, David, that's what I did. Family, real family, would have cared about my well-being too. Real family wouldn't have called me a burden behind my back. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. Fine. You want to play hardball? I hope you realize what this means. When you get sick, when you need help, when you're too old to take care of yourself, don't come running to us. We won't be there. The threat was clear, and it was exactly what I'd expected. I wouldn't dream of burdening you, I said quietly. After David left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to think. Their threats didn't frighten me anymore. If anything, they clarified things. Carol and David had never loved me. They'd loved what I could provide. Now that the money was gone, their true feelings were finally in the open. But the real test came the next day. I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw Carol's car in my parking lot. She was sitting behind the wheel, and when she saw me, she got out. She looked terrible, pale, thin, with red-rimmed eyes. For a moment, my maternal instincts kicked in and I wanted to rush to comfort her. Mom, she said, her voice breaking, please, I'm sorry for everything I said. I was angry and frustrated, and I said things I didn't mean, but I need you to understand. Without your help, we're going to lose everything. She started crying then, real tears that made her look like the little girl I remembered. This was the Carol who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to pick dandelions for me and call them beautiful flowers. I know I haven't been the best daughter, she continued through her tears. I know I've been selfish and demanding. But I can change, Mom. I can be better. Please, just give me one more chance. I stood there holding my grocery bags, watching my daughter fall apart, and felt my resolve wavering. This was what had kept me trapped for so many years. The guilt, the love, the desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. Carol, I said gently, do you remember when you were 12 and you promised you'd clean your room every week if I bought you that expensive bike? She nodded, wiping her nose. How long did that promise last? That's not the same thing, isn't it? You're 45 years old, Carol. You've been making me these same promises for decades. You'll be more grateful. You'll include me more. You'll be a better daughter, but only if I keep giving you money. This time is different. How? What specifically will you do differently? Carol stared at me, and I could see her mind working, trying to find the right words to manipulate me back into compliance. I'll call you more often. Visit more. We can have lunch together. And the money? Well, you'd still need to help us financially. We have obligations. There it was. The truth underneath all the tears and promises. She wasn't sorry for how she'd treated me. She was sorry she'd been caught. No, Carol. Mom, please. No, I'm done enabling your selfishness and calling it love. Carol's tears stopped as if I'd flipped a switch. The mask slipped away, revealing the cold calculation underneath. You'll regret this, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. You think you're so independent now? But you're just a lonely old woman. When you're sitting in that pathetic apartment all alone, wondering why nobody cares about you, remember that you chose this. Yes, I said. I chose self-respect over being used. I chose dignity over being tolerated. I chose love that doesn't come with a price tag. Carol got back in her car and drove away without another word. That evening, Martha called to check on me. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than I expected, I said, and realized it was true. I keep waiting to feel guilty or sad, but mostly I just feel free. Good for you. Listen, the travel group loved hearing about you. We're meeting Sunday to finalize our Italy plans. Helen found an amazing villa in Tuscany that we can rent for a week. Are you interested? I thought about Carol's parting words, about being a lonely old woman in a pathetic apartment. Then I thought about vineyards and olive groves, about new friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. Yes, I said. I'm very interested. Wonderful. Fair warning, though. This group doesn't just travel together. We really become family, the kind that actually cares about each other. As I hung up the phone, I realized Carol had been right about one thing. I was about to be alone, but there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, and I was finally learning what that difference was. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to discover what it felt like to be truly valued. 1 year later, I was standing on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset paint the rolling hills in shades of gold and crimson. The villa we'd rented sat perched on a hillside surrounded by vineyards, and the warm evening air carried the scent of lavender and rosemary from the garden below. Margaret, come join us, Helen called from the dining table where our group was gathering for dinner. Rosa made her famous pasta sauce and James found the most incredible local wine. I smiled and walked over to join my friends, my chosen family. These 5 people had become more precious to me than I ever imagined possible. Helen, the retired art teacher who saw beauty in everything and had taught me to paint watercolors during our trip to Ireland. James, the photographer who captured not just images but souls, and who had patiently shown me how to really see the world through a camera lens. Rosa, whose flower shop had been her life's work and who now created stunning arrangements from whatever wildflowers we found on our travels. Martha, my dear friend who had thrown me the lifeline that saved me from drowning in my own generosity. And Thomas, the gentle widower who had joined our group 6 months ago and who made me laugh in ways I hadn't in decades. This lasagna is incredible, Thomas said, passing me the wine. I think we should move to Italy permanently. Don't tempt me, I laughed. After this week, going back to reality is going to be painful. But the truth was, my reality had become something beautiful. The small apartment that had once felt like a prison now felt like a cozy retreat. I'd redecorated it with art from our travels, Helen's paintings from Greece, photographs James had taken in Spain, pressed flowers Rosa had collected in Ireland. It looked like home now, filled with memories of joy rather than sacrifice. Speaking of reality, Martha said, Helen has news about our next adventure. Helen's eyes sparkled with excitement. I've been researching Japan. Cherry blossom season. Can you imagine? We could visit temples, take a cooking class, maybe even try a traditional tea ceremony. 6 months ago, the thought of traveling to Japan would have seemed impossible. Too expensive, too complicated, too far from everything familiar. But this group had taught me that impossible was just a word people used when they were afraid to dream. I'm in, I said without hesitation. As we sat around the table sharing stories and planning future adventures, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed. The money I had once poured into Carol's endless demands now funded experiences that filled my soul. The time I had spent worrying about her next crisis now went toward learning new languages, trying new foods, and exploring places I'd only dreamed of visiting. After dinner, we gathered in the villa's cozy living room. Rosa pulled out the photo albums she'd been creating for each of our trips, and we spent the evening laughing at pictures of ourselves looking bewildered in foreign markets or triumphant on hiking trails we'd thought were beyond our abilities. "Remember when Margaret was convinced she couldn't handle the walking tour in Prague?" James teased, showing a photo of me beaming at the top of a steep cobblestone street. "That feels like a different person," I admitted. "A year ago, I would have said I was too old, too out of shape, too scared to try something like that." "You were never too anything," Thomas said gently. "You just needed people who believed in you instead of people who needed you to stay small." His words hit me with unexpected force. That was exactly what Carol had done. She had needed me to stay small, undemanding, grateful for whatever scraps of attention she threw my way. These friends wanted me to grow, to explore, to become more than I had ever imagined I could be. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, my heart jumped, wondering if it might be Carol. Despite everything, despite the cruel things she'd said, part of me still hoped she might reach out with genuine remorse. But it was from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, back home. "Thought you should know. Your daughter came by again today asking if I had a key to your apartment. Told her the same thing I told her last week. Hope you're having a wonderful time in Italy." This was the third time Carol had tried to get into my apartment while I was away. I could only imagine what she was looking for. Bank statements, maybe, or evidence of where I was spending her money. The thought should have upset me, but instead, I felt only pity. While I was here, surrounded by friends who celebrated my happiness, Carol was still focused on what she could take from me. "Everything okay?" Martha asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the text. She read it and shook her head sadly. "I almost feel sorry for her," Martha said. "She could have had a wonderful mother who loved her unconditionally. Instead, she threw that away for money that was never really hers anyway." "Do you ever regret it?" Helen asked gently. Cutting ties with her? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past year. "I regret that it was necessary," I said slowly. "I regret that I enabled her behavior for so long that she never learned to value real relationships. But I don't regret choosing my own happiness for once." "You didn't just choose your happiness," Rosa pointed out. "You chose your self-respect. There's a difference." She was right. For 43 years, I had confused love with self-sacrifice. I had believed that being a good mother meant accepting any treatment, as long as it came from my child. I had thought that unconditional love meant having no conditions at all, even when those conditions were basic human dignity. "Besides," James added with a smile, "look what you gained. We never would have met the woman who was too busy funding someone else's life to live her own." That night, as I lay in my comfortable bed in our rented villa, I thought about Carol's final threat to me, that I would end up alone, wondering why nobody cared about me. She had been so wrong. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, who celebrated my successes, who supported me through difficulties without expecting anything in return. More importantly, I had learned to care about myself. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for Margaret Patterson, not for what Margaret Patterson could provide to others. The next morning was our last in Tuscany. As we packed our bags and prepared to return to our separate homes, Thomas pulled me aside. "Margaret, I want you to know something. This past year, watching you discover who you really are has been one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed. You didn't just leave a toxic relationship, you built an entirely new life based on joy instead of obligation." "We all did that together," I said. "No, we found joy together, but you had the courage to choose it in the first place." 6 months later, I was having lunch with my travel companions at our favorite cafe when Martha's phone rang. It was her daughter, calling to wish her a happy birthday. As Martha chatted happily with her child, a conversation full of mutual affection and genuine interest in each other's lives, I realized I didn't feel the painful stab of envy I once would have. I had learned something profound over this past year and a half. Love isn't measured by biological connections or shared history. It's measured by respect, kindness, and genuine care for each other's happiness. The 5 people sitting around this table had become more family to me than Carol had ever been. After lunch, we walked through the park where I had once walked alone, and I marveled at how different everything looked when viewed through the lens of contentment rather than obligation. "So," Helen said, linking her arm through mine, "Japan in the spring, and then Rosa wants to explore Morocco in the fall. Are you ready for another year of adventures?" I looked around at these faces, weathered by time but bright with curiosity and kindness. These people who had no obligation to include me but chose to love me anyway. These friends who had shown me that it's never too late to discover who you're meant to be. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. As we walked together in the afternoon sunshine, planning trips to places I'd never dreamed I'd see, I thought about that name card from my birthday dinner 18 months ago. The useless old lady who's just a burden. Carol had been right about one thing. I was old, but useless? A burden? I was many things now. A traveler, a student, a friend, an artist learning to paint, a photographer capturing beauty wherever I found it. I was a woman who had finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between being used and being loved. Most of all, I was free. Free to choose my own family, free to spend my money on my own dreams, free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. And it was the most beautiful life I could have ever imagined.